I remember in 1984, just as the Oblates were making the decision of whether or not to close St. Henry's Seminary here in Belleville. I had been on vacation and I was returning with my brother driving me back to Belleville. We had good conversation all the way, and as we got closer and closer to Belleville, I must have become fairly quiet. And he commented to me, "Are you dreading to go back to the seminary? You're not saying too much as we get closer." And I said, "Well, we're struggling in our community with whether or not we should keep the seminary open. Some oblates saying we should, others saying not, and there's some tension in the community right now." And he said, "Well, how do you deal with that?" And I said, "Well, we have discussions, we talk it over, we try to reason with one another." And he said, "And you're dreading that?" He said, "Most American men would be knocking each other's lights out." So how you live as family and the kind of healing you may or may not have in your families, I suppose depends upon your values and what you uphold as important. Family is where we first learn many of the values in healing. And really, if we take our Christian commitment seriously, all of us are supposed to be healers, much in the same way Jesus was healers, not only in our nuclear families, but really healers in all of the relationships that we have. Our focus tonight is on healing within families, yes, and that certainly is important. We learn those values there, but we are to be healers like Jesus in all the relationships of our lives. I remember when as a young child, one of my favorite places to go was to the Algona County Fair. Have any of you been to the Algona, Iowa County Fair? I get that same reaction every time. And I remember the first stop that Dad always insisted upon was to visit the cattle barn, or the barns where they had a lot of the animals. And I was perched on Dad's shoulders at 5 years of age, walking through the barns. And of course I was bored with the cows and the pigs and the chickens, the animals we raised on our farm, and I wanted to see the turkeys and the ducks and the rabbits that we didn't have on our farm. So Dad let me down and I ran to where these other animals were. And getting bored with that rather quickly, I remember looking up and I didn't see anyone that I knew. And I was scared. I was lost. And then just as quickly, this elderly gentleman spotted me, picked me up in his arms, and began walking very quickly. I didn't know where. And of course, that made me cry even more. He took me right to Mom and Dad. I didn't realize he knew them. And I remember he immediately put down my younger sister and swooped me up in his arms, my dad, happy to now know that I was found. That younger sister that he quickly put down is right here in the audience. I knew I was more loved than she was. I could tell by the expression on my mom's face that she at first was angry that I had wandered away, but then delighted that I had been found and that I was safe. What a wonderful experience to have, to realize, to recognize that you are loved, that you are cherished by another human being. I remember too when I was in grade school, and I remember my cousin Richard, my first cousin, who was a good friend of mine, and we would pal around together almost every day at recess. And Richard, being a very good baseball player, certainly much better player than I was always chosen as one of the captains of the team. The two best players in the class, of course, were always the captains, year after year after year. And I remember Richard as a captain, because we were friends, as you chose the names of the players and went back and forth, choosing who you wanted, Richard would never choose me first. After all, he did want to win the game. But he also made sure I was never chosen last. And the boys who were always chosen last, sometimes their names weren't even called out. Because at that point, when there were only 3 or 4 remaining, the captains no longer cared who was going to be on their team. Those poorer players weren't going to help them win the game. But I always knew I wouldn't have to stand there with my head down, embarrassed, because I was one of the last ones chosen. I'm amazed now as I look back how Richard, at a very young age, had the sensitivity and the kindness to choose me. Even though he wanted to win the game, he knew that I wouldn't want to be chosen last and be embarrassed. I remember, too, when we would bale hay on the farm in Iowa. And we would bale hay always with my dad's 3 brothers because they all shared farms together. And so one brother would help the other. And of course, us kids, my nephews and us, would all be involved in this difficult task, in the hot weather and in putting this hay up into the barn. And I remember my dad's 3 brothers would always order their nephews, not only their own sons, but their nephews, would order them around, telling them to open a gate or to go up in the haymow to help with stacking the bales or to back the wagon up in front of the barn. But my dad never did that. Oh, he would order my brother and I and told us what to do, but he would never do that with his nephews. And I reflect on that later, what respect he had for children that were not his own. He realized that it was for their parents to tell them what chores that they should do. There was an elderly couple who lived down the road from us, Perry and Ellen DeGroat. And Perry and Ellen were quite a bit older than my parents, and they loved to play cards. And in the summer, we often would not eat the evening meal until well past 9 o'clock. Dad would be out in the field working until it was almost dark. Mom and her daughters, my sisters, would be trying to get the meal together. Us boys would be out doing the chores. Perry and Ellen would pull in our quarter-mile lane at about 7 o'clock in the evening when the house was chaos and Dad wasn't in yet. And Mom would stop what she was doing. I remember some comments she would make as she saw their car pull in the yard, but it was never too negative. She was just surprised that they were actually coming to see us that early in the evening. But she would stop what she was doing. She would sit with Perry and Ellen and discuss whatever they wanted to talk about, and we went about getting the meal together. And then I remember when Dad would get in tired from a hard day's work, the 2 of them would play cards often until well past midnight, when Mom would serve a delicious lunch for them before they would leave at 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. What a wonderful example of hospitality that should be in families as well. I know that's emphasized so much in religious communities today, that we be hospitable to whoever visits our community. Last night I spoke about our Blessed Mother and the fact that she didn't seek to understand very often in her life, to figure things out, to analyze, to try to figure out what is in God's mind. She didn't seek to understand. Her role, she realized, was to accept. And we have a beautiful example of that again tonight, when she and Joseph are wondering where this child Jesus was, missing for 3 days. Can you imagine the kind of agony a parent would go through when a child has been missing for 3 days? They must have been distressed and anxious. And yet she simply asks him, "Why did you do this to us? Why did you stay behind in Jerusalem?" Again, she didn't analyze as much as she accepted. She must have known that his role had to be different, that he had a different purpose, a plan that she perhaps did not at all understand, not even to a small extent understand. But she accepted that this was her lot in life. We're amazed, I think, at the Annunciation, at Jesus being lost in the temple, at other moments in her life that we know from Scripture. She certainly did not have things figured out, and yet she accepted. That had to come from a life of gratitude to God, an attitude of prayer in her life, knowing that God was present to her, that God was always with her, while she didn't understand much about that plan. But as it gradually unfolded in her life, she accepted what that plan was in her life. What a tremendous example she is for each one of us. We're not going to completely understand or be able to properly analyze what God is doing in our lives while we're on this side of eternity. And yet he does have a plan and a purpose for each one of us, and that's why each of us is created uniquely. He has a plan that he wants us to fulfill and to bring his good news with our own personality and our own spirituality to those whom we meet. The role of Jesus was basically to be a healer. To sum up, what he did is primarily that he was a healer. Even in his teaching ministry, certainly in the physical healings he performed, we can imagine in a lot of the conversations he had, he sought to heal people and to make them whole again. The most common expression that Jesus uses in the Scriptures is, "Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. I am with you. I will comfort you. I will console you. I will be there for you." May you receive God's choicest blessings in the healing that you are able to bring to others.